Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jihad is a word we hear a lot in the news these days, and it has a lot of different definitions depending upon whom you speak to. But jihad for the Sufi is the struggle to correct action, the struggle to appropriate behavior, the struggle to stay away from the evil inclination and do what's right. That struggle is an internal struggle. And if we are not involved in that struggle, then we are subject to the whims of our thoughts and our mind. Our thoughts and our mind don't necessarily take us in the right way, but we need to be conscious of what the right way is, and when the mind is steering us in the wrong way, we have to be able to control it to steer ourselves back in the right way. And if we're not involved in that struggle, we've given up our freedom. We've given up our choice because we allow outside forces to direct us and take us in the way that they deem we should go. It's like your friends. If you have no discretion as to who you make your friends, you will be pulled in wrong directions. If you have made the choice to have wise people, good people as your friends, you will be pulled in correct directions. Just by making that choice correctly, you will improve your life. Or, in the alternative, just by making that choice incorrectly, you will denigrate your life. So, we have to become very careful in how we make associates in this world, who are the people that we spend our time with, who are the people that we listen to. In the same way, we have to be discreet about how we listen to our mind. Our mind is limited in that our mind is elemental. We need to go beyond elemental and enter into the sphere of the spiritual and that which is appropriate in the spiritual. We have to be able to enter into the realm that is not elemental. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rahman and Rahim are not elemental. And to enter into Rahman and Rahim, we have to bypass the elemental. We should also know that this life is reciprocal in the way things happen to us. So that which we put out is that which we get back. And it works consistently that way. We create our life. We create the scenarios that we live in. And we should realize that. Because if we don't realize that, that means that we're walking through our life without a direct purpose. And we should have purpose. We should have a consciousness that tells us which way to go and whether we're going correctly or not. If we don't, once again, we're left to the whims of our surroundings, of our friends, of of the newspapers we read, of the television that we watch. We're left to the whims of outside influence. We need to become like a sculptor and sculpt our own life. And this takes consciousness that is aware of what we're doing and whether what we're doing is appropriate in its nature. And how do we do this? It begins with being around wise people and reading appropriate texts and implementing them into our existence. So we have to gain knowledge. We have to gain knowledge of wisdom. We have to gain knowledge of action, and we have to gain knowledge of what our purpose is in this world. And our purpose is to become perfected man, insan kamil. And what is perfected man? It's man who is living according to the way Allah wants us to live, who's living according to the rules and regulations that Allah set forth for man. And if we can't do that, or if we don't give that thought, we will be going astray. And if we don't give that thought, we will be going astray almost automatically. You can't just wander through this life. There has to be a self-awareness of what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why we're doing it. There also has to be an empathy that we have for other people. We need to be able to feel the pain and joy of other people. And we have to be able to react correctly to their pain and joy. If we can't do that, if we walk around isolated, we are again losing touch with reality. Why? Does God walk around alone? Or is God constantly giving to each of us, giving to nurture us, giving to the things that we need to survive, giving us love and guidance? Well, Allah is intermingled with all of us. He is intermingled with our lives. And if we isolate ourselves from other lives, then we're not acting in a godly way. If we're not giving towards others, then we're not acting in a godly way. If we're not giving, then things also won't be given to us. Things won't be made available to us. If you give love, you will receive love. If you give hatred, you will receive disease. If you give enmity, you will receive difficulty. Anyone who violates the sanctity of a wise man is going to run into trouble in their life, because that's the nature of the way the universe works. Everything comes around. Everything that goes around comes around. And we have to be ready for the things that come towards us, and we have to be ready for the things that we give out. And we have to understand what it is that we are giving out. Do we talk softly, or do we lose our temper? Temper is a very good example of what happens when we lose control. If we react to a situation that bothers us in a violent way, it's an obvious sign that we are not in control of our mind, that our mind is in control of us. And if our mind is in control of us, that means we're slaves to our mind. Now, in Islam, Abd, the slave, is a preface to many names. Abdallah, Abd Rahman, etc. They put slave in front of God's names. Well, many people are just the slave of the mind. They call themselves the slave of God, but in truth, they're the slave of the mind. And unless you've taken God's rules and incorporated them into the way you are the slave of the mind. And the mind is where the whisperer comes. The mind is where the ideas come into your head, and then when you turn around to see who said it, they're gone. And that's what the mind does. The mind listens to almost everything, and it doesn't have great discretion. So you have to have that discretion. And that comes from layers below the mind. The ocean, if you just look at it from the surface, is full of waves and turmoil. However, if you're capable of diving deep into the ocean, there's a stillness and a calmness there that doesn't exist on the surface. So if we are surface dwellers, if we just live on the surface of our lives and don't go deep into the reasoning as to why we do what we do, we will be subject to all of the waves and turbulence that go on in that ocean. If we go deeper, things begin to change. Now, Sufism describes different levels. Shariat, Tariqat, Hakikat, Marifat, and Sufiyat. Shariat is the basic rules of our actions within this phenomenal, physical, elemental world. Tariqat is when people say there is more than adhering to the rules that govern this physical world. There's a path that goes further. And that path, in the beginning, in Tariqat, has to do with etiquette and courtesy. It has to do with how people interact with each other and the way they interact with each other. So all of a sudden, normal interaction, which might be curt, quick, and turn around and that's the end of it, becomes a almost ritualistic process. When Mevlevis, the Tariqat of Rumi, when they meet each other, they shake hands, but that's not all they do. They kiss each other's hands. When they pass a glass of water, they'll pick it up, kiss it, and pass it over. It means there's a personal involvement and courtesy in everything they do, and a certain intention behind what they do to do things in a kind, meaningful, and loving way. Hakikat takes it even another step, and there's a shariat to hakikat, just as there was a shariat in the tariqat, where the courtesy becomes profound. Well, in order to enter into the realm of God's qualities, which is hakikat, your courtesy has to be profound, or you can't get into that realm. You can't move in there if you act like a boor, if you act like a buffoon. It's not appropriate, and you're just not allowed. Your actions cannot be reciprocated into God's qualities because your actions aren't right. When your actions get right, then all of a sudden other things open up for you, and God's qualities become apparent to you. But how can you possibly be aware of God's qualities when you run around screaming at people all the time? How can you possibly be aware of God's qualities when you're mean to people, when vengeance is part of your MO, when hatred is carried with you in the same way you would carry a glass of water. When those things become normative in your existence, the higher qualities can't come into your existence. So before we can interact with Allah, we have to learn how to interact with people. We have to learn how to give towards people, how to be kind towards people. And when that happens, then Allah's kindness can come directly to us. It's reciprocal. We get what we give. If people understood this more clearly and really knew how it works, they might begin to change in their interactions with people. Someone said to me once, other people don't seem to love me. And I said, become more lovely. And that's the trick. We all need to become more lovely. As we become more lovely, more love will be available to us. When we enter into the realm of hakikat and the realm of God's qualities, the etiquette becomes even stronger and more stringent, more refined, because now mercy and compassion come into the equation. And when mercy and compassion come into the equation, we have to change so that mercy and compassion is part of who and what we are. All of God's names are nouns and verbs. If we only know them as nouns, that means we can talk about them, and we can define them, and we can reiterate because we've memorized the definitions of each of these names. But unless we act out those names, unless we act out those qualities, we don't know what those words mean. So just as Sufism is not a philosophy, it's a way of being, God's names are a way of being. It's a definition of who He is to the extent that we can define it. And if we're going to be defining who we are, we have to understand how those qualities work, and we have to incorporate those qualities into our being. Only when those qualities are incorporated into our being do we become real. Hakikat means real. It means reality. Hak is one of the names of Allah, and it means the reality that is God's way. Well, that is the only reality there is. So if we want to become real, we have to act real. And what's the only thing that's real in all of existence? Allah. And if you want to join into reality, you have to begin to act like Him, or else you're bypassing reality and you're acting the way illusion acts. It's a disappearing act. It's an act that has no real to it. It's an act that does things for itself. It's an act that is looking to aggrandize the self as opposed to aggrandizing the one and only. My teacher, Bawa Muhaiyaddeen, was asked, can you tell us your story? Everyone wanted to know about his biography. And his almost standard response was, I'm not here to talk about my story. I'm here to talk about his story. His story is the only story that matters. Now, can we get to that point? Can we get to the point where our focus in our existence is not our story, that our focus in our existence is His story and understanding His story. If we truly say, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, only Allah exists, only Allah's reality is, our understanding of ourselves is not, and only when Allah's qualities enter us and we become those qualities, that's the only time that reality has entered into our life. And what happens is, as those qualities, which are non-physical and non-elemental, enter into our life, all of the previous understandings that we had as to physical and elemental things begin to alter. They begin to change. No longer do we have differences. No longer do we need to be judgmental. No longer do we need to be critics in this world, because we've transferred everything to the One. And the One has infinite patience for His creation. Up to the last breath, He is waiting for them to discover Him. Up to the last breath, He is giving them life. We need to have that kind of compassion in this world. When we see somebody who's inappropriate, we should be praying that they realize what's appropriate. We should be praying that change comes into their life. Shems said, if someone hates you, as opposed to reacting to them, for 40 days straight, send out love to them, over and over and over. And at the end of the 40 days, they may not have changed, but you'll certainly be different. And that's the point. We need to become different. So no longer do we have animosity about that. No longer do we put out what is coming at us. We put out something different. And that's part of this becoming, that we're not reactive to the world, that we are centered and react through the qualities of Allah, so that the world's praise and the world's blame no longer affect us. They no longer make us react. And it's in this non-reactive space that peace is found. Because if we're constantly running after praise and running away from blame, we've got a very busy, unproductive, confused life. And that's just how it happens. Because instead of centering onto the qualities that are real, we're worried about the illusory nature of how we are accepted or rejected in this world. And as we know, all of the prophets, all of the saints went through rejection. They all had difficulties. And these difficulties were imposed on them by people who didn't understand. And if they spent all of their time trying to rectify how other people thought about them, they wouldn't have any time for God. And we need to learn to have time for God. So we begin to move. We begin to move from this illusory world into Allah's world. We begin to move from this illusory world into Hakikat. And it's in that movement that our salvation exists. It's in that movement that we become real. So we have to make an active effort to sculpt our life in that direction. This world is a stage. Each of us has been given the opportunity to decide what character we're going to play. And we have to think about that. Who is that character going to be? Is it going to be a hero, or is it going to be a villain? Is it going to be a saint, or is it going to be a demon? We have to develop that character. And that's the work of jihad. That's the struggle between ourselves and our mind. That's the struggle towards correct action. We need to pray that we are put on the path of correct action. We have to pray that we understand correct action and that we follow Allah's path towards Him. May it be so for each of us. Ameen, Ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.